Continuing the series on CSS framework features in Bricks 2.2, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the typography options. But if you want to check out the other videos in this series, I'll put a link to the playlist down below so you can check those out. So what we're going to do today is we're going to see how we can set up our framework to handle typography. So to access this, we're going to come out to the options in the top left and choose Styles. And that'll open up the new Styles panel. Inside here, you can see down the left-hand side, got things broken down to various different components: theme style, classes, variables, colors, and so on. Now, I've already created a theme style and I've associated that with every page, and I've applied some basic styling to do with elements. Nothing that's going to affect our typography. So to access typography, we simply come down to the typography option, and inside there, we can now start creating our typography scales. Before we do though, let's take a quick look in the top right hand corner. We've got a couple of icons here. We've got the toggle canvas preview, which opens up the preview so we can see what our page is going to look like with the settings we configure. We've also then got the option to see what that looks like on the various different breakpoints, so desktop, tablet, mobile, and so on. So if we want to check out our fluid typography, for example, we can see that by using this option. Pretty cool. Disable that by clicking on the eye. If you want to maximize this to full screen to get more working space, you can do that and get rid of any distractions. So we'll leave it set like that. Now in the main area, we've got the scale name. By default, typography is what you're going to see, but you can name this anything you want. So in our example, let's deal with the headings first. So we're going to put this, and we'll call this headings. Click on Create. And now we get our typography scale options. Now inside here, this is broken down into a couple of different key areas. Let me go over each one of those and then we'll break those down and start using them to set up our typography for our headings. So on the left-hand side, we've got a section that allows us to easily configure all the fluid typography in our setup. We'll come back to that in a moment. Then you've got a visual preview of what it's going to look like and the various different variable names that we're going to be using. If we come over to the top right, you can see we've got some more icons. We can rename this scale, we can create a new scale, reset it, and we can also take a look at the generated CSS. Again, we'll come and take a look at those in a moment. Underneath them, we've got our utility classes, which again, we'll cover later. So first of all, let's go and take a look at what we have here. You can see we've got manual values. By default, whatever scales we set up inside here, that's what we use here to create the various different minimum and maximum sizes for any of the variables we configure. However, we can override those if we want specific values. All you need to do is flick this little toggle, and then we open up the option so we can configure any of the minimum and maximum values for any variable we've got set up here. We're going to leave this disabled. Then we've got our variable prefix. So currently we've got text and so on. We want this to be headings. So what we're going to do is we're going to change this. We're going to get rid of text and we're going to put H in its place. So now you'll see what's happening is it's showing H2XS, HXS, HS, and so on. Doesn't make a lot of sense. That's because you're using the scale type of t-shirt. Now that might sound a little bit odd, but what it basically means is it's using the standard kind of sizing you'd expect in clothing: small, medium, large, extra large, and so on. We can override that. We can choose from numeric if we want to, and you can see that's H1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so on. And we can also change this to custom. When you change it to custom, you can set your scale steps and your baseline step inside here. So at the moment, this is doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And as you'll notice that this is going the wrong way. So H1 is the smallest, H7, which we don't actually need, is the largest. So what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of H7, delete it, and we're going to just reverse these. So now we've got H6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So that makes a lot more sense. We can reference the actual HTML element that we're used to, your heading 1, and so on. But you can set up whatever you want. If you want this to be heading and you wanted a dash, you can absolutely do that. I like just working with the H. Then we've got our baseline step, and this is saying what is going to be using the base values we set for the minimum mobile and the maximum desktop, 16 and 20. And as you can see, H3 is what's being used in those values, so 16 and 20. You could change this if you wanted to, so you could say 2, for example, and now the H2 takes on those values and everything gets smaller above. You could obviously flip that and say something like 6, and then everything gets bigger. The scale becomes bigger, as it were. Let's set that back to 3. That's perfectly fine. So the H3 is going to take on that size. Then you've got your minimum and your maximum values. This is saying that the fonts won't get smaller than 16 and won't get larger than 20 for the H3. Now, obviously, you can change that if you want to. So we can say, well, the H3 needs to be a little bit bigger than that. So let's say 24 and we'll say 32. So you can see that now affects all of the scale because it's basing upon that value we set there. Then you've got your type scale ratios, and this dictates the difference in scale between the various different minimum and maximum values. So if we change this over to something bigger, like for example this major 7th, you'll see the difference between the smallest, the minimum, and the maximum gets considerably bigger because we've got a much bigger scale ratio. Personally, I like to work with what we've got here. That works perfectly fine, but if you want to change those, you absolutely can do. So now we've created our headings. So all we need to do is we can come over, we can take a look at those, the generated, and inside there you can see there's all our sizing. As you can see, even though we use pixel values, it is converting that to use clamp, rems, and so on. So we've got a fluid set of typography rules inside here. So that's pretty cool. So we'll minimize that. And now all we need to do is click on generate variables, and that will now create those 6 variables for us. So we now have all those variables created. If we come into our variable manager, you'll see we now have a new set inside here called headings. It tells us there's a scale, so we're using that inbuilt scaling options for creating them inside Bricks itself. They're not imported in any way. And you can see we've got 6 definitions. So if we click over this up, there's our H6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Everything is configured inside here. Everything is done for us. So let's just save this to make sure we've committed it, and we are done. So how do we actually implement these before we move on and take a look at some of the other options for working with typography and utility classes and so on? Well, let's say we want to marry these up to our normal theme style. So what we can do is we can come into our theme styles inside here. Now if we open this up and come into our typography, inside here, you can see you've got your heading 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so on. So what makes sense now is to open this option up, and inside there where it says the font size, we can now click on the variables option. That will show us our variables. Now you can see I've created some other ones here for the rest of the actual videos in this series, but we're going to focus in this example on the headings, and you can see this is heading 1, so we'll choose heading 1 from the list. We leave all the other values as they are. We literally only want to handle the size of the typography. So we'll minimize that. And we can carry on doing this now for the next one. So heading 2, again, we'll choose our H2 variable, and we'll carry on doing this. Now, I'm not going to bore you by making me watch through all of these, so I'll quickly do these, and then we'll jump back in and take a look at how they all work. So now if we go back and open up the preview, you can see there's our headings 1 through 6, all being scaled proportionally based upon the fluid typography scale we've just created. It's pretty simple and straightforward. And now anytime we add in a heading 1, heading 2, and so on, it will by default pick up the values that we've set using those variables. And obviously if we come in and change things inside here, so we come into our typography, for example, open our preview, and now let's just change our scale. We'll generate our variables and confirm that we're happy to overwrite. And now you can see that updates inside our preview. So we can easily configure our overall variables for our typography. Okay, so that's our headings done. Let's take a look now at how we could set up a second typography scale to handle our normal text, our body text, and so on. So what we're going to do is let's just close this down. We're going to create a new type scale. So click on create. We're going to call this text and click on create. So now we've got our text. So we're going to leave the prefix variable. Text is fine. As you can see, this goes from 2XS to 2XL, which again works perfectly fine in this example. And the baseline step in this case is M for medium. And as you can see, there's your 16 and your 20. So everything is set up here. We're going to leave this as it is. That's a nice scale, works perfectly fine. Hit generate variables and click OK. And now if we want to apply those, all we're going to need to do is go back into our theme styles, open up our typography, find our body text and edit this. And then from our font size, we're going to see it's 15 set by default. We're going to click inside here. We're going to close our headings down, open our text up. Text medium is our baseline. We're going to click on that and see that now updates inside our preview. So all that now has been set up inside our theme style. It's been set up in our variables, so everything is configured. Now let's move on and take a look at how we can create utility classes. I don't personally use utility classes very often, but we can create them. They're useful if you want sort of like a class that's just a one-shot. It just does one thing, like controls the size of text or something. And that's what we're going to use here as an example. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over into our text. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a utility class, and we're going to create utility classes for our text through all of these different sizes. So to do that, we're going to do text dash, and it doesn't have to, you can name this whatever you want. You can call this body, you can call body text, anything you kind of want. We do the dash, and we're going to do the star. Now, the star is basically a wildcard, and what that wildcard will do is it will replace text dash with these actual variables we've got set here. So text to XS and so on. So not a great example, but it shows you how it works. So what we're going to do is we're going to put this down to be the actual CSS property we wanted to affect. So font dash size. And that's basically it. All we need to do now is click on Generate Utility Classes, click on that. So now we create our utility classes. If we come up and take a look to the generated CSS, you can see there's our utility classes, text to XS, text XS, and so on. So they're all set up ready for us. So now we can start to use those. Let's hit save, jump out of here, and let's just add in some text. We'll just add in a text link, for example, choose it. And now we can do is we can come up here, open up text, and you can see there's our text, so we could easily set this to be text to XL. So basically applying that simple utility class to this link element, so it doesn't have to be a basic text, kind of like heading or rich text or something. Anything that's text orientated can utilize that particular utility class. Like I say, they can be useful. They're not something I use very often, but they're there should you want to add them in to your overall sort of CSS framework and workflow. That's how you configure your fluid typography scales inside the new CSS framework options in Bricks 2.2. If you want to see how to combine this alongside the colors option and the spacing option, take a look at the videos in this playlist. It'll go through everything you need to know. As always, all applicable links are in the description. My name is Paul C. This is WPTuts, and until next time, take care.